Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Christian Therapist Podcast. Lindsay Castleman here, and I have Aron Strong with me. Hello, Aron.
What's up, Lindsay?
Doing well, doing well. I do like that we are moving into talking a little bit more about parenting together. We just wrapped up the last podcast talking more about the super strict parent. But even as we start to talk about, man, what's like the other end of the spectrum?
Right.
In talking about that, and just working things out between us, we ended up coming up with even more categories.
Well, it's funny. I don't know how many therapists out there are familiar with or remember like the circumplex model. It was a model
Mhm.
that we learned in grad school, but talked a lot about kind of like the rules and structure dynamic, and how people manage boundaries, and then how connected they are, right? So rigidity versus cohesion. And so it was just funny that as we were talking about these dynamics, it like these dynamics fell into those
Right.
categories. And I was like, wow, whoever came up with that circumplex model kind of knew what they were talking about because
They
they go
did.
together.
They've sat with a lot of different parenting or just relationship
Yeah,
dynamics
just
for
family
sure.
dynamics, I think, is what it was connected to. But
Right.
it just works in parenting, right? So
Right.
that's what we talked about. If there's a super strict parent, then the opposite of that is the super permissive parent,
Yeah.
right? That's the complete other side.
Complete other side. And that was even something because as we were talking through it, I'm like, well, what about this? What about this? And you were like, ooh, that sounds more like a disengaged parent.
Right.
Right. And so then you've got the opposite of the disengaged parent, and that can be more of the enmeshed parent.
Yeah, like that super enmeshed parent.
Right, right. And so then we're like, oh my gosh, we've got even more, even more topics we're going to cover. But for today, as we look through the four, and again, we're looking at you said super, like we're looking at the
Yeah.
super strict, the super
Hmm.
permissive, because we have to be as parents, like we still do need to set boundaries, and we
Correct.
still do need to give grace where grace needs to be given. Like we still need to do some of these things. It's when this is where we lean on
Yeah.
what we lead with. Um, that's where it can start to get alarming. And I know that there was a fear in you, and there can be a fear in me too, of just we don't want parents to feel judged or condemned. But this does feel timely, because you and I are working on a project together right now that have to do just with the masks that we wear,
Hmm.
and a lot of it has to do more with just being aware. And we're not aware unless we start to really examine ourselves,
Yeah.
examine how we show up. And so, the heart behind this series of the super stricts, what's happening with the super strict parent, the what's happening with the super permissive parent, the heart behind this is more for all of us to sit back and just to do some reflection, to have better words for what's happening, maybe even to start to connect it to our own story, right? So that
Yeah.
way, that way we're not blind or unaware to what we do, right?
And it's important too, in just the ways that we kind of look at stuff, that we want to make sure that we have access to compassion
Hmm.
for every presentation,
Right.
right? As a therapist, especially a Christian therapist, I don't want to show up and show up in judgment. I'm
Hmm.
trying to show up to connect to what's the driver of distress, what's the driver of perhaps dysfunctional behavior that's maladaptive or doesn't show up well. And there's often something that's trying to accomplish something in there that shows up to drive certain types of behaviors. But when it comes to, strict or permissive, if you worked with any parents, right, then you know that there's almost always a strict and a permissive parent. Like they go together.
Right. They find each
Right.
other.
Right, and then between the two, you're trying to represent the best of both sides. You got someone who's like, "Hey, following the rules and making sure things done are orderly and disciplined is important," and the other parent is like, "Yeah, but grace and and the sense of freedom and mercy is like also important." And so
Hmm.
they keep each other the design is to be complementary, not conflictual, but of course we always argue with our spouse about parenting. But here we are looking at the extreme ends of that spectrum. What's going on
Right.
when it's like so seems so far out of bounds?
Right.
What's happening there so we can kind of look beneath the hood and be like, oh, okay, here's what's going on there so we have a better idea to how to help support it. But if we are that
Mhm.
person, then we're also, as you said,
Yeah.
kind of looking at ourselves and going, why do I do that? And what is going on in there? And what do I need to do about
Yeah, for sure. I will say, I was like, my dog just started barking. So sorry. I'm like, what's going on there, dog? It's
it?
a package being delivered. Anyways, but going back to your point, Erin, for me, it was very important to just sit back and to go, okay, there is a difference, right? And to really put that in my head when it is a permissive, more of the super permissive parent, it's the one that's going to avoid or be afraid of saying no. There's a big place of avoiding conflict, not wanting for there to be conflict. Um, and there can be a myriad of reasons why they're
Right,
wanting to do that, but it looks really like an avoidance of no. And so the child doesn't have boundaries. To a place the child can feel like they are in charge or they get what they want, or if they push back a little bit, then the parent will cave. They
right,
start to know these things. And that's different than, like we were talking about, more of the disengaged parent that is they're not really present, right? This more super permissive parent, there's still a presence there.
right,
What can start to happen within them can be this place of going, man, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't want to deal with the conflict that's happening in front of me, right? There can also be a place of conflict can be scary.
right,
Conflict can be something that I don't know how to do. I've never known how to do well. And so just the absence of conflict is what can feel better. So it's almost like I am going to make this moment right now feel okay and not think about the consequences for it later, which
right.
there will be,
Yep.
right?
And it's hard because that feeling of conflict, it's very difficult to move into conflict. Uh, and, if you're oriented to protect the relationship, protect the sense of connection, but there's enough distress or pushback that you get, then you preserve connection by avoiding the thing that creates disconnection, which
Mhm.
is holding that line and holding that boundary. And so, in that sense, you are avoiding the difficulty, you're avoiding the conflict, preserving the moment, as you said, the connection in this moment. And you're hoping, right? You just hope that some later moment, that other thing will work itself out.
Sure, sure.
Right? They'll pick it up somewhere, like whether it's school or church, like they'll learn somewhere that that's like, but at least here, so we're just want to kick that can down the road. Well, like it's just too exhausting. It's been too long of a day. It's just one more fight. I don't want to
Hmm.
fight about it again.
Hmm.
And kids are great gamblers, right? So if they can roll the dice and 1 out of 10 times they can get you to cave, boy, they'll
Hmm.
roll that dice, right? And
Oh,
who knows?
sure.
Maybe it'll work out. And so that makes that
Yes.
moving into distress so difficult when you are prone towards conflict avoidance.
Right.
So it's just a very heavy feeling to be able to
Hmm.
navigate. So you're just super permissive parents are like, nope, won't be doing that. Right.
Right. They more say no to that,
Correct.
not no to the kid,
That's
right?
right. We
They're
will.
saying no to that feeling of distress within them,
Hmm.
right? And what we can find is that there can be internally a place of maybe it's not knowing how to handle the no. They might just not exactly know what to do. Um, there could be a scared place for them. There could be a place where even growing up, they might not, their no didn't matter. So
Right.
why would it matter now?
It's such an influence based on how we were raised when it comes to boundary management and rules and structure. Because if you were just crushed with an overly strict parent,
Hmm.
then being an overly permissive parent may be seen as protection. I'm protecting you from that type of a terrible experience I had.
Right.
Likewise, if you were never held accountable or held to rules and structure, then you're operating from a blank slate. You're like,
Hmm.
I don't know, it was fine for me, right?
Yeah.
I turned out fine, right? Or
Hmm.
however that is. So
Hmm.
whenever we kind of err on any extreme, sometimes we can protect kids from overly strict presentation, so then we become overly permissive as a correction. And
Right.
sometimes we just have no idea how to do it. And so we just think we are, we collapse, or we're just like, yeah, it was fine for me. It's fine. Like, who cares?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
uh, so I think that that's the other thing that can kind of show up based on what our own childhood was like.
For sure. And anytime we show up in relationship in a certain way, and a lot of times when we show up in a relationship in ways that can protect ourselves, and that's what avoidance can really do, is it protects us in the moment. Whoever's doing the avoiding, we're protecting and prioritizing ourselves in that moment. We're protecting and prioritizing just the value that we have, maybe of peace, the
Hmm.
value that we have of just feeling calm, of not being bothered, of whatever it is. When we're protecting ourselves in relationship, there is always a cost, especially if that's what we continually do, versus protecting the relationship,
Right.
which is what we want to do as parents. We want to protect the relationship. We want to protect kiddos, not just be protecting our own discomfort, our own avoidance, our own fear. We want to protect the whole relationship. And that's the same even within marriages. If we enter into these relationships prioritizing protecting ourselves and not protecting the relationship, the cost to the relationship will come,
Hmm.
whether it is immediate, whether it is we start getting the phone calls from school because now we're in places where they're putting boundaries and our kid doesn't know limits.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe we're starting to get the phone calls that they're not getting along well on sports teams, on dance teams, on
They're sassy. They're being disrespectful to people in authority. Uh,
correct.
that you can't get away with that in that environment where you can get away with it at home.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So there's so many places of the cost will start to come
Hmm.
at some point, even to a degree when you look future, like jobs. There are definite boundaries in jobs. And I know both you and I, we employ people.
Right.
And so it is fascinating to me just even kind of how sometimes the workforce can change.
Hmm.
There are those that can come in and feel like feedback is really tough. They can feel as though they can't just come and do things exactly the way they want to. Like it's very foreign
Right.
to them.
Yep.
Now honestly we know we do try to weed that out, before they get hired. But there can be just this place of going, again, it can be within like immediate, it can be
Sure.
within schooling years, it could even be within when they are out of the household.
Yeah, because the shaping of the experience when you have a parent that is always willing to adapt everything to the preference of the child, then that becomes like an expectation, an unconscious, right, present expectation that they should be able to walk into any environment and have that same kind of preferential treatment. And
Hmm.
then they're shocked when someone says no. And you're like, what do you mean no? And
Hmm.
they can look like they're entitled, look like they're selfish, but oftentimes it's because just no one's ever taught them how to do that. Like that's never been a thing in their life. So it's
Hmm.
literally out of their wheelhouse. They're like, I don't understand what you're saying. I've always People have always allowed me to adapt. I could always shift it if I didn't like it. I could just do it over here or do it this way. What do you care if I want to do it my way? right? Why do
Hmm.
I have to do it your way? I've never been forced to do it somebody else's way. And so that overly permissive parent often sets up a child as they move into adulthood for some pretty rough experiences when they encounter rigid structures and expectations of performance
Hmm.
when there's been a lot of accommodation. Not that there shouldn't be grace or, no accommodation, but the inability to manage a rigid structure because they've never been exposed to one
Hmm.
really limits and can negatively impact their integration into the workforce or into other relationships, right? Whether that's a personal relationship or maybe a nonprofit or a volunteer organization or whatever. It's a volunteer, like we're all making stuff up. Like, no, there's the structure that we do. Like, but I don't want to do it that way. We're like,
Hmm.
oh, you can go start your own nonprofit. You know what
Right,
I
right,
mean?
right.
So
Where you're like, I don't know how that would go,
yeah,
you
well,
know?
you can
Yeah,
do what
yeah,
you want, just not here, right? If that's not
right.
what you want. So it's
Yeah.
difficult in terms of some ways we try to protect things, then we
Hmm.
can often set them up for difficulty. But I also want to bring up another dynamic of why often you can get a super permissive parent, and
Yeah.
that's when the parent is so overwhelmed with
Hmm.
their own level of distress,
Hmm.
their own financial hardships, their own relational hardships or trauma. Like there's so much internal things they're already wrestling with that they just can't engage to that level of more distress one more place.
Hmm.
They're just
Right,
so overwhelmed
right.
that they're just trying to hold their life together and kids are running amok, but they don't have enough internal resources to muster to try
Hmm.
to orchestrate all of that. They're just kind of in the act of crumbling or just, threadbare holding things together that can be really difficult, that can often lead to permissiveness.
Oh, completely, completely. Because they are at the end of their rope there, you know. And, going back to there is that cost, another cost of permissive parenting is the place of you're not really ever going to fully get to know your kid in permissive parenting because there is a side of your kid you're not going to be able to see and engage with. Right? And it is fascinating. I've talked to several teachers or friends who are teachers where they're just like, man, it can feel like the parents who aren't showing up to do the boundaries, to do the correcting, it's like they don't even know their kid. So we call them and we tell them about their kid, and they're like, that's not my kid.
Right.
They would never. No. Right. And so then there's this place where the teachers are like, no, it's happening. It's
Yeah.
happening all the
They would
time.
never do that, except for the fact that they
Did
did,
it.
which has
Right.
prompted my call. I'm
Right.
not inventing
Right.
stories to tell you.
Yes. But then their kiddo gets rescued out of the hard thing. And so it's like the parent is not wanting to feel the hard thing. And so they're then going to go rescue the kid out of the hard thing instead of
Right.
helping the kiddo stay and be held accountable,
Right.
which is so, so important for development. And when we go and we mirror this place of even looking scripturally and just relationally with God, there is such an accountability that He
Hmm.
holds us to. And there is a loving boundary that He holds us to consistently,
Right.
right?
It makes me think about how many couples we've worked with, right? When you're trying to get a sense of each person's individual family history. And one of the partners cannot handle conflict at all in the marriage, and they just crumble or they get really angry, like how dare they, like that, like and then you're like, where what did you learn about conflict? Well, my parents never fought. And
Mhm.
did they hold you to it? Like, and we never got in trouble. You know what I mean? They're like, you have no skills at all of how to navigate conflict because you've never had to.
Right.
While it was less distressing and maybe very connected as an experience, that ability to how do I manage myself when I'm under fire, when something is on the line, when there's something that has to be resolved, and you have no models to draw from on how to do that, often that comes from these early stages of super permissive parenting
Hmm.
that they fail to expose their child to difficulty, where they think they're protecting their child from difficulty. That
Hmm.
lack of this exposure creates a whole new problem because then they have no skills for when it shows up in their life because it will.
Hmm. Oh, for
So that
sure.
balance is so important.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. Well, and two, Aaron, as we really kind of wind this up here, there is, or I guess we would wind it down, not wind it. I don't know. You know what I'm
Ramp
saying?
it up, bring it
Ramp it
down.
up, bring it down. Yeah. We're talking to therapists, and so let's just say we have an a super permissive parent that's in our office, you know, by us starting to know that there is a fear there, right? Fear can look like
Right.
avoidance, fear can look
Yep.
like overwhelm, right?
Yep.
There is a fear there, and it's a fear that they're not wanting to sit with, or it's too much to sit with, right?
Yep.
So if we're talking about the parent that's so overwhelmed, there's still that fear, and we still want to meet them in the fear and really sit to notice, like, what does that fear need?
Hmm.
Because we're trying to start to build their own way of just really widening the gap of their distress tolerance.
Right.
Like, or maybe we're closing the gap. Look at me. I'm like, we're closing the gap, but we're widening the window of tolerance.
Right.
Of being able to sit in distress and to
Yep.
sit in these places of it will be uncomfortable for the relationship between you and your child, but let's sit with that discomfort now. Let's be able to hear it. Let's be able to listen to it. What's it saying? What's it showing you? So that we can start to know the discomfort, you'll be okay.
Hmm.
Like you will be able to move through it. And
Yep.
who are the people that we can also help put around you that can kind of be that support team that
Hmm.
we're also moving through it.
Yeah.
As we move through it together, that's really important.
Yeah. When a feeling wants to avoid or protect by being overly permissive, as you're saying, that fear and that what it's trying to protect sits underneath. And so permissiveness at its core is not engaging the thing that feels like distress. So the answer isn't to inundate the client with all the ways they should be in, creating boundaries and the rules and structure. It has a lot more to do with like what is that feeling that makes it so hard? What is it? What's its function? How do you engage that feeling? As you said, what's that thing need from underneath? And then we're leading them in how to engage that difficulty because then that becomes a model. If they can do it within themselves, then we can help them know how to do that towards their child. And so, but managing and moving into that space is important. It's easy for therapists to have their own perspective on how parents should parent, right?
Mhm.
Because that's universal. Every parent thinks they have a better angle on how to parent than other people.
Mhm.
But it's recognizing the value of rules and structure matters, and grace and mercy and exceptions matter. And it's how do you hold the balance between those things, and where do you find yourself in that? If all there is in grace, then there's not actually grace. That's just the rule, right? There has to be a rule to have an exception to a rule. And
Mhm.
so, how do you dynamically find that midpoint, or for whoever the person we're working with, where is their posture, how they're going to navigate these two elements, especially if there's a co-parent, if there's a spouse, how are
Mhm.
they doing that in conjunction with another? Because we each have these two different perspectives. Like all of that is the key to navigate so that there is a healthier presentation that can evolve out of who they are.
Mhm.
And that starts with what is that feeling in you that
Right.
doesn't want to.
Right. And I also feel like helping parents know that if you decide to move away from this super permissive parenting, it doesn't mean you have to go to then super strict parenting.
Right.
That there is a middle ground. And I know for me, the more that I learn attachment-based parenting, Karen Purvis with TBRI was so helpful. That's what I just
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'm going to look up. She was going through, they have the stages of engagement with kiddos. And so I'll just read them off real quick. There's playful engagement, which
Hmm.
doesn't sound super strict to me.
Nope.
Then there's structured engagement. Then there's calming engagement and protective engagement. And then kind of saying, like, when are the different times that we use these? And there's just so many more resources and tools that it's not either or. It's not, I'm the pendulum over here. Like I'm way far over here now because my parents or one of my parent or my caregiver was over here. So if I leave this, I must be over here. There's just so many beautiful ways that have to do more with attunement, presence, structure,
Yep.
um, and just this place of strength
Yep.
within us, that we also get by having the Holy Spirit within us as well, that
Hmm.
helps us move into these places of distress, not to shut down, but to understand and also guide and protect, which is what boundaries are supposed to do.
That's right. Yep.
So, yeah, so there's so many more resources out there, but that can be one of the fears is if I don't do this, then that means I'm going over here, or I feel like I'm having to counterbalance with my spouse, even.
Mhm.
It might not be your parents. It could be my spouse is the bad cop. So I feel like I've got to be the good cop or I've got to be the
Right.
Disneyland parent. Um,
Right.
that's not helpful either. That's a sign of we need to go and actually do some couples counseling and get a little bit more, or even parent coaching and get more on the same page
Yeah.
so we can see both the truth and the grace in both parents.
And you hear that a lot too, right? So like the strict parent's so strict because the permissive parent's so permissive, and vice versa. The person's got to be so permissive because they're so strict.
Mhm.
But there's a reason underlying all of that interactional behavior of what's presenting within them, of what the line is. And only being a reaction or a counterbalance leads us to like an extreme pendulum swing. We also do that because if I don't know what a middle is, the pendulum swing kind of gives me a perspective. And so we're looking for like a middle ground, or how do we discover that? And so allowing that to emerge. But if strict parents need to know grace is important, then permissive parents need to know that there's a reason for a boundary and protection.
Mhm.
That is that we sometimes we can leverage fears, right? If a child's running towards a busy street, that fear is going to let you set a boundary pretty quick, right, to keep them from running into the street. And
Yes.
there's times of helping people connect to the valid fears that a lack of rules and structure or highly permissive has a different fear, right?
Mhm.
And so sometimes we have to increase a fear where it's missing, right? And attenuate a fear where it's overactive to
Right.
kind of create a better spectrum of choices that allow parents to be more adaptive to each moment about, is this a moment, and it's like being married, and all parenting is like you got to pick your moments.
Mhm.
Right. If you're trying to get out the door to get to church or to get to an event, this is not a moment to have a big lecture, sit down. Sometimes you're just like, We'll deal with it later," because you've got to get going. But that can't be the norm because
Right.
then we have to have a counterbalance. So, how do you find that balance? I think is a huge dynamic, and
Mhm.
working with a parent or parents to validate the good qualities of both sides and then helping them represent that within themselves and coordinate with another so that there is a spectrum of a balance of our uniquenesses and how we parent
Mhm.
that keeps people in the middle or
Right.
ish.
Yes, yes, completely. And I think that's important of just like you were saying, we're slowing down those fears, or we're seeing, is there a fear that's not there that should be there?
Right.
Um, in that space. But yeah, loving the conversation. And I'm glad that we've come up with two more. So
Yeah.
we're going to continue this conversation. And next time we're going to talk either about the enmeshed parent or the disengaged parent. One or the other. Depends on which one we're feeling in the moment.
Yes. But they will
So
be super.
it'll be super. They'll be super, super disengaged and super, super
Enmeshed.
enmeshed.
Yes.
Um, yeah, in those spaces. But again, going back to, I think it bears repeating, there is compassion and no judgment in this thing. We just want everybody to be aware.
Yes.
It's just a place of the more that we're able to know what we do and have words for what we could do, the more that we're able to start to really and truly, I believe, be refined
Hmm.
and to grow more into the likeness of Christ. And
Yeah.
so that's always the hope. And, the good news that we have is that nobody has arrived and nobody will arrive. There will be no perfect parent either.
Right. That's
And there
right.
will be no perfect person. And so
Yeah.
we're all on the journey together. There could just be a time where Aaron, you and I just talk about our own parenting struggles, right?
Sure.
Because even though we're
Absolutely.
talking about this, we can find ourselves on the spectrum. We can
Right.
find ourselves doing this within our own dynamic of with Kevin for me, with Jen for you. It's just
Mhm.
we're all in it together. And
Yeah.
so we want, though, to keep spurring each other on to
Yep.
growth. We want to spur brothers and sisters in Christ just on to just more of being able to, I really do feel like it's even feeling the presence of God with us in parenting as
Mm.
well, which can be that beautiful connecting
Yeah.
feeling, you know?
And can be really challenging to figure out how to do in real time,
Sure,
you
sure,
know?
sure.
And it's important too, as we're looking at therapists and in our own life, the way that we parent or the way that we engage our kids can really heavily influence in how we engage our clients, right? Whether we show up super rigid or we
Right.
show up super permissive, right?
Hmm.
It's not just parenting, it can really overlay in how we show up in our relationships. But
Yeah.
that's why we want to really construct compassion, look at where the healthy part is, kind of how do we discover the best range of health within a person's wiring and personality to become who that God designed them to be, and we can walk this through together.
Hmm.
Encouraging each other towards faith and good works. Right, this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, thanks, Aaron, and we will talk more about parenting later.
I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun.
Sounds good.